I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is part of the Young Scholar webinar series on climate change, macroeconomics, and finance, organized by the E-Access Forum. I'm Diego Kanzig, and I'd also like to welcome our PhD student committee, which always asks great questions at the end. Before we get started, I have to do a couple of announcements. In particular, I'd like to announce that we have a new call for papers for our Young Scholars webinar series. We will be drawing from the submitted papers for the 2025 winter term. Please see the homepage of the E-Access website, www.e-access.org, for more details. Or you can send your submissions directly to info@eaccess.org. You also find all the info in the chat. In today's webinar, Ara Jo will discuss her research on how to estimate the elasticity of substitution between clean and dirty energy. It is my pleasure to introduce Ara. Ara is an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Bath in the UK. She obtained her PhD from the London School of Economics and was a postdoc at ETH Zurich. Her research is on topics related to the energy transition, technical change, and the optimal design of environmental policy. That sounds all really exciting. So, Ara, without further ado, I'd like you to take over and tell us more about the substitution between clean and dirty energy. You have 45 minutes, and then we have time for a Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Diego, for the nice introduction. And I noticed a bit of German in you, in the way you pronounce my last name, Ara Jo. I'll say it's Ara Jo, but anyway. So yeah, this presentation is going to be about substitution between clean and dirty energy with biased technical change. So I will begin with a broad motivation behind the project. So most people, I think, would agree that innovation in clean technologies is a critical factor in addressing climate change. And in addition to some important other pillars of climate action, such as carbon pricing, low carbon innovation is really a key pillar in climate policy. So many developed economies around the world are taking this very seriously. In the last fiscal year, the US government invested about $34 billion into clean energy technology projects, and also the UK plans to make a record amount of public investment of 22 billion British pounds on clean R&D in the next coming years. So in line with the importance of technical change in the policy arena, the topic has received a lot of attention in the academic economics literature as well. The case in point here can be that the theory of directed technical change is arguably one of the most important and popular framework where we study how we can transition to a clean economy. So I will briefly introduce the theory here. So in a nutshell, the theory suggests that there are two opposing factors that determine how or in which direction technology will develop. The first force is the market size effect that encourages innovation in the more abundant and cheaper factor. The second force is the price effect that encourages innovation in the more scarce and expensive factor. And which effect dominates the other in this context is determined by the elasticity of substitution.
Yasmin, I think you're not muted. Could you please mute yourself? Sorry.
Sorry. No problem. So when the two inputs are substitutes, it's intuitive that the market size effect will dominate the price effect, because we will then use more of the cheaper input and interested in increasing the productivity of that input. But on the other hand, when the two inputs are complements, the price effect will dominate the market size effect, because if we need both, we would rather make the more expensive input more efficient. So as you can imagine, the degree of substitutability between clean and dirty energy will have strong implications on the path of innovation and the cost and stringency of climate policy. And just to drive home the message, I will talk about the quantitative exercise provided in a seminal work by Asimoglu, Guillaume Burton, and Hemu 2012 AER paper that shows that considers two different scenarios with different substitutability, different degrees of substitutability between clean and dirty energy. So they show that when there is a limited substitutability between clean and dirty energy, we will need a permanent carbon tax to achieve energy transition. And even then, the timing of the transition will be delayed with environmental consequences. On the other hand, when there is a high strong substitutability between clean and dirty energy, they find that in fact we can achieve an immediate transition to clean production with a temporary carbon tax. So this shows how important the substitutability is in the analysis of climate policy. But what is quite surprising is that our empirical understanding of this parameter is quite limited. Although it's a key parameter that is used in many macro climate models, when people have used very different values from one another, when they calibrate their model, some people go for 3, some people go for 10, and others have even chosen values below 1. So what this paper does is to address this gap in the literature and empirically estimate the elasticity of substitution between clean and dirty energy using microdata. And with that elasticity estimates, I then measure the direction of technical change within the energy aggregate. And finally, I derive the aggregate macroelasticity from the microelasticity estimates. Because it's a relatively long talk, so to give you a bit of preview of the findings, I find that there exists strong substitutability between clean and dirty energy, which is good news. So the long-run elasticity of substitution is around 3. But I also find that the bias in technical change was mostly towards dirty energy in the past couple of decades. However, I do find a bit of a shift to clean technologies in recent years. Also, what's interesting is that the aggregate elasticity is quite similar to the microelasticity due to low energy cost shares. I will explain more why these are important, but typically, aggregate elasticity is harder to estimate. But here, this finding tells us that, look, it is harder to estimate, but we don't lose much by relying on microelasticities. So the paper relates to several different strands of literature, but the main intended contribution of the paper is, of course, to provide rigorous and reliable empirical estimates on the elasticity of substitution between clean and dirty input. There are a couple of papers out there that have done this, but the way I think this paper improves upon those existing works is that the microdata allows me to have provides access to information on both input and prices. And with that, I can estimate the elasticity according to its definition of how input demands change as relative prices change. Other existing papers had data only on input demands, which sort of forced them to estimate the whole production function with many other parameters. And secondly, I will show you that the empirical results of the substitutability between clean and dirty energy and the bias in technical change together provide a very strong microempirical foundation for the theory of technical change. So given the historical movement of energy prices, and the substitutability between clean and dirty energy, the dirty energy bias technical change I observe in the data is consistent with the prediction of the technical change, a directed technical change framework. And finally, there are some empirical studies that estimate the implications of directed technical change, and the way this article contributes to this group of papers is the joint investigation between the elasticity and the implications of directed technical change. So here is the outline of the rest of the talk. So I will talk to you briefly about the data, and I will show you how I estimate the elasticity of substitution. Next, I will talk about how I construct a measure of that bias technical change, and then I will show you the derivation of the aggregate elasticity from micro elasticities, and then with that I will conclude. All right, so the research context here is France. I use rich microdata from the French manufacturing sector. The first important source is the energy use survey by the EACI, which has a representative sample of plants with 20 or more employees. And what's really nice about this survey is that it provides energy consumption and expenditure by fuel. And I bundle different fuels into clean and dirty. So the clean bundle here includes electricity, steam, and renewables, but it's mostly electricity. And the dirty bundle here includes other fuels such as oil and natural gas and so on and so forth. So this is the classification of fuels into clean and dirty bundle here is following the tradition in the prior work. And I can calculate the unit price of each bundle, unit price of clean and dirty energy, by similarly, aggregating expenditure into clean and dirty bundle and divide them by their respective consumption. So in the end, I will have clean and dirty energy demand and clean and dirty energy prices. Next data source is a physical census for the universe of French manufacturing firms. So some key financial variables are available from this survey, and I merged them together to work with an unbalanced panel between 1994 and 2015. So I show you some descriptive statistics. So here this is just growth rates, but I want you to have a look at this, the first two columns. So this is the relative clean energy consumption that is increasing in most sectors. And in column 2, this is the relative price of clean energy that is decreasing in most sectors. But already we notice here that in 7 out of 10 industries, the relative share of clean energy is increasing much more than the relative price of clean energy is falling, sort of hinting at the strong degree of substitutability going on here. For instance, if you see a machinery here, clean energy price is going down at 2.6% annually, whereas clean energy consumption is going up by almost double that speed. So it already tells us that there's good substitution capacity there.
Ara, can I ask a clarifying question? Maybe I missed this, but how do we define clean energy? Like, where is nuclear, for instance, in the mix there? Is it just renewables?
Exactly, that's a good question. So clean energy has electricity as a whole. So in the French context, in the French context, so is actually favorable for this kind of classification because over 90% is low carbon, nuclear plus renewables account for over 90% of electricity power and power generation in France. So it is kind of nice to see electricity as clean, but you have to, so the way to think about this is from an end user's perspective. When they use electricity, they don't burn fuels. Only already power plants have burned whatever fuels in order to produce electricity. And in any case, for the future, what we want is to electrify almost everything. So here, clean means electricity.
Okay, I see. Which, yeah. I mean, if you have some plants that use natural gas, I mean, there are some, yeah, I mean, as you say, there are also emissions associated with that. So if you had a carbon tax, it would hit sort of both goods to some extent. I agree that it would hit the dirty bundle much more, but electricity would be affected much,
exactly.
also to some extent.
But it will be moderated by the power mix, right? But in the French context, most of it is not subject to carbon tax. So relatively speaking, dirty energy price will go up much more.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, so moving on to the specification. So I consider an energy aggregate function that combines clean and dirty energy according to the CES production function. So here I have EC, clean energy, ED, dirty energy, and respective technology parameters. So I have AC, clean energy augmenting productivity term, AD, dirty energy augmenting productivity term, and here sigma is what I'm after, right? The elasticity of substitution parameter. And the first order conditions with respect to clean and dirty energy put together leads to this equation 2. And this is kind of the main equation that will sort of run throughout the project. So here I have relative input demands, and here I have relative prices and relative productivity of clean energy. And this equation 2 is basically what I use in a log linear relationship. So on the left-hand side, I have energy input ratio, and on the right-hand side, I have the relative prices. And this alpha 1 is exactly the elasticity of substitution according to its definition, right? And I control for sector fixed effects, region fixed effects, and year fixed effects. But notice here that I don't include firm fixed effects in the baseline specification, because I want to be able to interpret my elasticity as the long run elasticity of substitution. If I include firm fixed effects and exploit annual short run time variation, then my estimates will be more suitable. They should be interpreted as short run substitution. But the literature that I'm relating to is more interested in the long run substitution. So that's why I do not include firm fixed effects in the baseline. Now, so the literature is aware of the endogeneity of firm level energy prices. This is mostly because of demand and productivity shocks. So in the epsilon here, so imagine there's some productivity shocks that affect energy input choices, but in the French context in particular, there are some quantity discounts going on. So as they update their input demands, their prices might also change, leading to omitted variable bias. So then what I do is to follow the tradition in the literature and use national energy prices to instrument for the firm level price. So what's going on in equation 4 here? So this is the instrument. How it works is that I fix the firm level price in the pre-sample period. So T0 is not part of the sample period. And I let it grow at the same rate as national energy prices are growing, okay? And then I impose a 3-year lag between the pre-sample period and the first year of the estimation sample. And I will talk more about the why. And this has to be D here. The dirty energy price instrument is constructed similarly. So this comes with two identifying assumptions. First of all, this firm-specific omitted variable or unobservables that we're worried about are not correlated with the growth rates of the national energy prices. This assumption is not something that keeps me up at night because the energy prices at the national level are driven by policy changes or international demand factors, especially in the case of oil price and so on. But the second assumption is that the initial firm level price from the pre-sample period should also be uncorrelated with future unobservables. So this is why I impose a 3-year lag to increase the gap between the pre-sample period and the first year of the estimation sample. And as a robustness check, I then later increase this gap longer and longer, like 5 and 7 and 9 years, to mitigate the possibility that this pre-sample price is still correlated future unobservables. So these are the estimates across different specifications. First thing to note is that the estimates are above 1, meaning that clean and dirty energy are substitutes. And here in column 4 is my preferred specification with different fixed effects. And here I find the estimate of 3.3. It is very similar to what the Papageorgiou et al. Paper have found before. I think they find something between 2 and 3. So I think it seems to be in the ballpark of kind of existing estimates. Next, I do the estimation by sector to examine some heterogeneity. And as you can see, there's very strong heterogeneity across sectors. So here we have paper, substitution elasticity is beyond 5, and we have chemicals here beyond 2. So but what is noteworthy here is that across different production processes, it seems there's strong substitution capacity because for all sectors, the estimates are safely above 1. So there are different robustness checks I can do here. For instance, is the pre-sample energy price in the instrument still correlated with future omitted variable bias? So then I increase the lag to 5 and 7 and 9 years in this table, and you can see that the estimates are relatively stable. Also, something else I can try is, something else I might be worried about is the fact that national energy prices that also form the instrument might reflect general trends in technical change, and we would not want our elasticity estimates to capture the influence of technical change. So what I can do, because I don't have firm fixed effects, is to use only the pre-sample energy price as the instrument, so the time invariant part of the instrument. And that also doesn't seem to affect the estimates very much. It's still between 2 and around 2 and 3. Finally, I try firm fixed effects and see what happens. First of all, I noticed that we then now interpret these estimates as short run, and note that the estimates are much smaller than what we saw in the previous graph. And this is intuitive, given that the substitution capacity is much more limited on a year-to-year basis, whereas the long-run substitution will account for sort of large-scale capital adjustments that are not captured in these short-run estimates. But so other than these two, which are statistically not significant, I still find that most of the estimates are above 1. So moving on to the bias, the technical change, the first order conditions that I showed you earlier can be rearranged as follows, which is shown in equation 5. So now here I have the relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology, as a function of input demands and prices. And because I have data for all these variables, prices and demands, and now I also have estimate of elasticities, I can then construct a measure of the relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology. And once I do that, I sort of examine some heterogeneity and how it looks generally and how it correlates with other firm characteristics. The first thing I find is that there's huge heterogeneity across firms. So for instance, the 90th percentile firms' relative productivity of clean energy is 6 times more than the relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology of the 10th percentile firm. But in case a lot of the heterogeneity is driven by heterogeneity across sectors, I also examine heterogeneity within sectors, and I find that the same ratio is still 2. So a given firm in the same sector could be twice as relatively productive in clean energy clean energy than in dirty energy compared to another firm in the same sector. It also, the measure I constructed also correlates with other firm characteristics that have been documented in the literature in a similar way. So for instance, this relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology is positively correlated with energy efficiency in size and negatively correlated with age. So in other words, if you're energy efficient and big, you're more likely to have higher productivity in clean energy, and also if you're younger. And these correlations have been documented in the literature. So now what I do with that measure is to calculate year-to-year changes in this relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology. So if I see a positive change from one year to the next, that implies that this AC grew faster than AD, right? Meaning that technical change was biased towards clean energy. But if this measure is negative, if the change in this measure is negative from one year to the next, that means AD grew faster than AC, meaning that technical change was biased towards dirty energy. And when I plot the year-to-year changes over time, this is what I find. So first thing to note is that the relative productivity of clean energy augmenting technology is lower at the end of the sample than at the beginning of the sample, right? Meaning that the whole technical change over the whole sample period was mostly biased towards dirty energy. Okay. However, we do still see some shift towards, we do see the relative productivity of clean energy picking up towards the end of our sample period, which implies that there's been also a shift at the end. So I kind of as a robustness check, I also I also try a different industry specification that is more specific to energy transition. Energy consumption. It is a little more granular. This is still at 2-digit level, but compared to the previous graph, so I only have 10 sectors here, but I think here I have 15 sectors, so it is a little more granular. But still, even with this different industry classification, the general trend in the bias in technical change is similar, including the shift towards the end. Okay. So now let's go back to the theory and see how it squares. So the framework of directed technical change tells us that when the two inputs are substitutes, the market size effect will dominate the price effect, right? When we can use either, we want to improve the productivity of something that's cheaper. So then innovation is directed to the cheaper input. That's the theoretical prediction. And what we find is that, so when we look at the historical movement of energy prices in France, we see that dirty energy was considerably cheaper than clean energy throughout the sample period. So that's one observation. And the second observation is that the two are substitutes, right? So these two together rationalize the dirty energy bias technical change that I observed, that I document from the data, providing together a micro foundation for the theory of directed technical change. So given that, just in case there are people who wonder about the dirty energy bias technical change, it is not quite, it may come across as a surprise, but if you look at like other more micro empirical evidence, there's lots of pieces of information that are consistent. For instance, patents in clean and low carbon technologies were below 2% of the total patents until late 2000s. So we often hear about the surge in clean innovation and so on and so forth, but in the grand scheme of things, it was still a very niche thing. Also in the energy sector, the ratio of renewables to fossil patents were relatively new until very recently. Then, but what about the shift? How do we make, what do we make of the shift to clean technologies that we observe towards the end of the sample period? So the theory also offers some explanations. First of all, we are okay, fine. From the graph, we see that dirty energy was definitely cheaper. However, when you think about it relatively, at the beginning, it was almost 3 times cheaper than clean, but towards the end, it was only half as cheap. So despite the absolute price being lower, the relative price competitiveness of dirty energy was decreasing over time, and that might have incentivized people to innovate and adopt more clean technologies. Also from the literature, we know the importance of subsidies, right, for clean energy, for the energy transition. And if we look at this government R&D expenditure by fuel type in France, we see that the subsidies for renewables have surpassed subsidies for fossil fuels. Around the same time, we observe the shift in the technical change from the data. So having done that, now I will talk a little bit about the aggregate elasticity. The microdata allows me to deal with this identification issues that are way more challenging to address when you work with macro data. However, using microdata yields a microelasticity of substitution, right? But as I said, the literature that I'm hoping to inform with my empirical estimates is the macro climate literature on sustainable growth that is mostly concerned about optimal policy and things like that. So they care about the aggregate elasticity, not the micro. And it is concerning given that micro and macro elasticities can be actually quite different. So I follow a methodology developed in the Overfield and Raval 2021 Econometrica paper to derive the aggregate elasticity from my micro elasticity estimates. So the only difference between, it's basically the same, but the only difference between micro and macro elasticity is what goes on the aggregate part. I mean, what goes on the input demands part. So aggregate elasticity measures the response of the aggregate clean dirty energy ratio to a change in the relative prices, right? So the aggregate clean dirty ratio here means the total clean energy consumption in the economy divided by the total dirty energy consumption in the economy, okay? And this Overfield and Raval paper beautifully shows that it combines two effects. First, there's within firm substitution effect. As the price of dirty energy goes up, firms will switch to relatively cheaper clean energy. And this is the substitution within firms captured by my microelasticity estimates. Secondly, there's also reallocation effect. So what this is that when dirty energy becomes more expensive, dirty energy intensive firms will experience a higher, larger increase in their marginal cost of production. And that some of that will have to be passed on to consumers and leading to higher output prices. And that can create a cost advantage for clean energy intensive firms that do not have to increase their output prices as much. And they gain market share from dirty energy intensive firms. So there's this reallocation effect. And this effect is moderated by two factors. First, energy cost shares, omega. As energy costs become more and more important, that will have, the rising price of dirty energy will have a larger impact on the marginal cost, and as a result, output price, right? Also, elasticity of demand. If consumers are more responsive to changing output prices, that will lead to a stronger reallocation effects, right? So now, the relative importance of these two effects is determined by the degree of heterogeneity in clean energy intensities across firms captured by this heterogeneity index psi. I will not show you the specific to the definition of this index because there's a lot of terms, but it is basically proportional to the variance of clean energy shares across firms and lies between 0 and 1. So when all firms are identical in their clean energy shares, there will be no reallocation, right? Everybody's using the same clean energy, everybody has clean energy shares, there is no reallocation. No one's benefiting more than the other when the price of dirty energy goes up. So in that case, all that matters is within firm substitution, right? When chi is 0, this term will go away. On the other hand, when some firms only use clean and others only use dirty, there's basically no within firm substitution, and all substitution will come from reallocation. Okay, so when chi is 1, we will have no within firm substitution and only reallocation. So this expression here in equation 6 shows you that the aggregate elasticity is a weighted average between the micro elasticity and the reallocation effect. Okay. So once I kind of understand that, I just have to follow a simple two-step process to obtain the aggregate elasticity. First, I recover industry level elasticities of substitution from my micro elasticities. So I have this micro elasticities for each sector, right? And I am able to construct this heterogeneity index for each sector, and epsilon, the demand elasticity, and omega energy cost shares. And once I have this industry level elasticities, the aggregate, so the manufacturing wide aggregate elasticity substitution is constructed from those industry level elasticities. So basically repeating the same step twice, going up each step, firm, industry, and all of manufacturing. So step one, I am able to calculate the heterogeneity across firms in their clean energy shares from the data. And across sectors, this ranges between 0.07 and 0.2 with an average of 0.15. So this doesn't seem very big, but still this heterogeneity index is in fact greater than what the Overfield and Rabat paper had in their labor and capital substitution context. And as you know, I have the sigma micro estimates from the previous section, and I set the demand elasticity parameter to 3 for all sectors. So basically, I am assuming that there's sufficient substitution going on across products within sectors. This is the number 3 comes from Overfield and Rabat, and I then finally calculate omega energy cost shares from the data, and these are also quite small, ranging between like 1 to 4% across industries. So we know that energy cost shares are relatively small. What I get then is this is shown in this picture. So this red diamonds capture the firm level elasticities that I reported already, and the industry level, sort of a little more macro elasticities are marked by this blue cross. So we know that it is, all of them are to the left, all of them are smaller than the micro. This is because this is very small, right? We have less than 5% energy cost shares, and we have about 3 micro substitution. So the weighted average between the two is lower than the micro elasticities. Now I just repeat the same thing now, just to get at the manufacturing wide aggregate elasticity. So I can do the same. I can similarly calculate the heterogeneity index for the whole manufacturing sector. And this within industry substitution now will be the weighted average of the numbers I got from the previous step. And here, the demand elasticity parameter is set to 1. It's smaller than 3 that I used in the previous slide, right? And this is the idea here, is that the substitution between products from 2 different sectors would be much less than substitution between products from the same sector. Okay, and then I calculate the energy cost shares from the data, and that's on average 2% in the manufacturing sector. And that all, so talking all these numbers spits out the aggregate elasticity of substitution in manufacturing of just a little over 3. But if you notice that my preferred is micro elasticity estimate was about 3.3. And it is so I did all the trouble to arrive at the aggregate elasticity, but it is very, very similar to the micro one that I estimated from the data. And this highlights the importance of within firm substitution in this context, due to due to very small energy cost shares and relatively small heterogeneity index. So with that, I arrive at my conclusion slide. I think I'm on time. So the findings provide empirical support for the framework of directed technical change that's widely applied in the literature. And the results, I'll say, are quite optimistic in the sense that clean and dirty energy are strong substitutes. And despite the overall bias in technical change towards a dirty energy, we saw kind of a strong empirical evidence of a switch towards clean technologies. And this is interesting. I mean, this is a research agenda that I'm very much excited about and leading to lots of follow-up questions. For instance, I think it would be really cool to understand more about determinants of elasticity. What are the factors that lead to some firms being more flexible than others? And also, does it change over time? And if it changes over time, what are the mechanisms and so on and so forth? So yeah, so with that, I will stop and thank you so much for your attention.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ara, for a very interesting and clear presentation. To all the attendees and panelists, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I can read the question, or if you would like to speak for yourself, you can also use the raise your hand function. To break the ice, maybe I can start with one or two questions. The first one, I was wondering, because you showed that on average, it is the case that clean energy was much cheaper than dirty, but that was like an average. So I was wondering, is there some heterogeneity there that it could exploit? So maybe for some firms, actually, it's the opposite, and then it would be possible for you to kind of test this mechanism, because then you would expect the price effect to be dominating for these firms where basically this relationship may be reversed.
Mm-hmm. So what you wonder is, so the dirty energy was relatively cheaper than clean energy, but you wonder...
Right, but that's on average, right? So across all the firms. So I was wondering whether for some subgroup of firms, actually, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
or maybe they're closer to each other, and it would sort of allow you maybe to look more into this mechanism of market versus price effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because due to quantity discounts, if you use a lot of electricity, your unit price in fact might be lower than buying natural gas or something. And the question is whether the force of technical change is that same for those as well or not. Okay, yeah, that would be cool.
And then I have one other question / comment. So I was wondering, so you make this distinction between short and long run elasticity. So long run, like what horizon are you thinking here? Is this really over the entire sample, or like what is really the long run?
Yeah, what I have in mind is, as you said, sort of the over the whole sample period. Because imagine that by exploiting variation across firms, I am comparing firms at the beginning of the sample and their firms at the end of the sample, and how do their energy input ratios differ with respect to their price ratio. So I think here the time frame can be as long as like 15 years or so. But yeah.
One thing, I mean, I know you have a short time dimension, but one thing that I mean, I know the paper is accepted, so maybe you don't want to do it, but one thing that I was wondering that you could try that could be interesting would be to do sort of a local projection. So you keep the firm fixed effect, but you regress sort of the relative energy use multiple periods out on the relative price today. And this gives you sort of a medium run elasticity. And it would be nice if you could show whether that's close to the long run already, to give a bit of a better sense, like what's really the long run, or like how fast do we get there, right? Because the short run is year to year, right? Which I agree makes sense that is low, but long run, like I think it's important how long it really is.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially from policy perspective. How long do we need actually to achieve this transition, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? So if not, I can ask one more thing.
Either I did a too good a job or too bad a job.
No, I think I think you were super clear. So one question that I had was on this aggregation exercise where you go from the micro to the macro. And there, because you emphasized sort of this within firm substitution and the reallocation, but I thought the way you define the microelasticity, you also allow for both channels there because you don't have the firm fixed effects. If you had the firm fixed effects, it would just be within firm substitution, right? But sort of because you don't have that, I think your estimate, the micro one, also captures some reallocation. Is that right, or am I missing something here?
So the reallocation here basically captures some like dirty firms growing large or clean firms growing larger versus dirty firms, right? I don't think the first part where I estimate the elasticity with or without firm fixed effects really captures that because I'm talking about ratios in the first part.
Okay.
So that would not capture whether firms are growing larger or smaller.
Right. Yeah, I see. But so I guess what I was trying to say was that it also captures the fact that, okay, there are like differences across firms, and sort of your estimates assumes that you could sort of close these differences because you don't exploit just the within firm variation, right? Or maybe I'm misinterpreting. But I agree, it's maybe not exactly what you have in mind when you do the aggregation exercise. So
yeah, I think the ratios make it difficult to really look at the growth. Yeah.
There is a question in the chat by Samuel. He asks whether the methodology also provides an elasticity of total energy use to the overall energy price, apart from the substitution elasticity. So
it would be a simpler estimation, I believe, instead of clean to or dirty to clean ratio, and instead of energy demands ratios and price ratio, relative prices, you would just have energy demand and the whole price on the right hand side. So then you will get just a simple price elasticity of energy demand with the first order condition approach.
Yeah. Is this something you did or
at the beginning, or?
No, yeah, I was wondering whether you ever did this computation as opposed to like the relative that you focused on, or like to.
No, I think I was always interested in kind of the substitution part. Because here, if you just estimate the elasticity of energy use with respect to its price as a whole, just energy as a whole, you don't know where the reduced energy is, what happens to that reduced energy consumption? Is it replaced by energy and labor, or is it replaced by capital and so on? Well, I think I was always interested in the substitution.
That makes sense. Are there any more questions from our PhD student committee? There is one more question in the chat. Oh, there is so Jasmine, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, so thank you so much for the presentation. I was actually wondering, perhaps from a policy perspective, so what would your insights tell us about what the best way would be to incentivize firms to adopt at a faster pace green technologies or green energy in their production process? Is that anything your results can speak to, or?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fair question, and I think Another question in the chat is sort of going in the same direction. Can you elaborate more about the policy implications? So I have to admit that the results themselves do not have like direct policy implications, but the way I see how the paper, the way I see the use of these results is that there are many micro models out there that actually provide very direct policy implications, right? And all of these models rely on when they calibrate their models, they will have to put in some number for this elasticity parameter. And at the moment, what the literature does is there's huge, people use different values. There's a very wide range of values people go for. My contribution, the way I see it, is to provide empirical guidance in the calibration so that they can provide, more sort of reliable and credible policy implications out of their models. So I wouldn't say, I mean, one thing I can say about something more direct I can say about my results is that, well, energy transition is possible, right? Because the two are substitutes. That's a good news. I think anything beyond that, I would not feel comfortable saying.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Great. If there are no any other questions, I think we can close this for today. Let me thank all the attendees and our PhD student committee for attending and engaging with us. And my special thanks go to Ara for very interesting and clear presentation. Our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, October 30. And Oliver Wang from Colombia will talk about his research, The Economics of Biodiversity Loss. Until then, hope you all have a great time and take care. And thanks again, Ara.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.